If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this. What's a story that you've heard that still gives you chills to this day? My great-grandparents grew up in a small town located in the lower regions of Louisiana. Raised on a healthy diet of squirrel stew and local folktales, my grandparents were the Cajun stereotype. When my great-grandparents were first married, they lived in a small house near a cane field. Across the field, there was a Catholic church which ministered to most of the humble, Bayou town. My great-grandparents made it a habit to attend church during daylight hours as it was a long walk to and from church, unless they walked through the cane. Well, one night, for one reason or another, they decided to attend evening mass. They walked to church as the sun was shifting down below the visible earth. When they exited the building, it was pitch black. Fatigued from a long day of work, my grandparents decided to walk through the cane and avoid the long path. The crickets chirped as my grandparents crunched their way through the cane, one right behind the other. They could barely see through the dim moonlight, leaving them to rely on sound and touch. Working their way through the cane was tiring, and my grandfather stopped to catch his breath. My grandmother bumped into him and they both froze. Another set of footsteps had joined theirs. They stood frozen in place, hearing the heavy thud of feet crunch against the cane. My grandfather began to slowly walk, my grandmother by his side. They were afraid to enrage the visitor. My grandmother noted its odd walking pattern. Immediately, fear ran through her. She began to run, and then the footsteps behind them grew fast-paced. My grandfather took off after her, not wanting to be caught by the visitor. After about 5 minutes of sprinting, they reached the end of the cane field, their house in sight. They quickly raced to the door, fumbling to unlock it. A shadow emerged from the cane field, walking on 4 legs. It begins to run at them as they manage to unlock the door. As they open it, their dog runs inside. Their dog, Kaiser, trembles as they lock the door once more. Kaiser was usually a fearless animal, and often accompanied my grandfather on his hunting trips. His bravery was gone as the door began to shake. Something was banging and scratching on the door. My grandfather assumed it was some animal. Then, the doorknob began to jiggle. Somebody was turning it from the outside. Eventually, it stopped. Shuffling could still be heard outside of the door. My grandfather grabbed his rifle and stood guard all night as my grandmother slept. When the sun began to rise, the noises outside ceased. When they opened the door, it was covered in large scratch marks. To her death, my grandmother claims that she was chased by the Rougarou, Cajun werewolf. I've never told this story publicly before because I'm a journalist and it's an effing crazy story and I need my credibility. But here it is. When I was a kid, I lived on a farm in Nee, Ohio, near a bunch of rock mounds that were supposedly Indian burial mounds. At the time, I lived with my father and stepmother and stepbrother, Kyle. He and I used to pick berries in the woods that his mother would turn into pies. One day, we were picking berries out by the mounds when we both get the feeling we're being watched. All of a sudden, something jumps out of the bushes and screams at us. Now, as I recall, it looked like a midget, dressed in filthy clothes. Like a little old midget man. And I got the feeling it was trying to catch me. We dropped the bowls of berries and ran home. Flash forward 30 years. I hadn't seen Kyle in a long time, because our parents got divorced over a decade ago. We got back together for our sister's birthday party. By then, I'd decided that the whole scary little man in the woods story was just something I had dreamt or made up or something. My wife was there and I told her, I'm going to find out for sure about this damn story. I walked over to Kyle and said, you know, I have this weird memory, I don't know if it's a dream or not. But, we were picking berries. And a little man jumped out of the bushes? He said. Did a little research on this in the last year. The Indians that lived in the area had a legend of a creature known as a Pequodji. It looked like a little man and liked to scare/kill little kids. Seriously, WTF? A long time ago, in the woods somewhere in northern Michigan, a young 9-year-old girl was staying in a cabin her grandpa had owned for many, many years. It was a small family gathering, a sort of mini vacation some of the family would get together and do once every year or so. It was a small cabin, with one small bedroom where Grandpa slept, and the rest of the cabin filled with several bunk beds around the main area for the rest of the family to sleep. There were only a couple of windows, one of which was a small 1-foot by 1-foot window at the very top of the front door. The front door was a very big door, which put the small window quite high off the ground. Too high for even a standard tall man to peer through. Inside the cabin, straight across from the front door, was where the little 9-year-old girl slept on the bottom bunk. After a long day of playing around the cabin and exploring in the woods, looking for mushrooms and climbing trees. Everyone was wore out and ready to get some rest to prepare to do it all again the following day. In the middle of the night, while everyone was sound asleep, something woke the little girl from her slumber. As she rolled over to readjust her position and go back to sleep, she heard a slight tapping and scratching noise. She lazily opened her eyes and looked around the moonlit cabin. Everyone was fast asleep. The noise continued. She scanned the room some more, starting to feel a little on edge, not knowing what was making the noise. It sounded so close. And then she seen it. Her gaze froze and focused up at the little 1-by-1-foot window at the top of the giant door. There, staring back at her, was the face of a horrific creature. It had a long nose and mouth, with a snarl of a grin full of teeth just staring back at her. The eyes were large with a tint of yellow, and the whole face was covered in hair. Fear began to rush over her instantly. She tried to yell, but she couldn't squeeze a breath from her lungs. She closed her eyes tightly, hoping it was just in her head, but as she opened her eyes again and looked up at the window, the creature was still there, no longer making a sound, just staring back at her, baring its teeth. She glanced over at her mom, who was sleeping on the bottom bunk of a bed a little ways away. She was sound asleep. The girl wanted to get up and bolt for her mother, but she truly was frozen with fear. Then she heard it. The creature spoke. "Little girl. Let me in." Terror is all the girl felt. It sounded like a man, with a commanding deep voice. All the girl could muster the strength to do was pull the covers over her head and pray that the beast leaves. The scratching began again, this time sounding much harder and deeper. She spent the remainder of the night clenching her watering eyes tight and trying her best to not move a single muscle. The next day, when she awoke, she immediately told her family about the terrifying night she just had. She told them about the face, and what it had looked like. How it stared at her, and spoke. No one believed her. Everyone just told her she had a bad dream, that there is no way something or someone could be tall enough to look through that window down at her like that. That is until they went outside of the cabin. Outside on the front door were several very long, very deep scratches in the wood. Everyone was speechless. The grandpa, not saying a word to anyone, simply painted the window black. Many years later, when the little girl was no longer a little girl, she was riding in a car to move to up north Michigan. On the radio, a very weird song was playing. She listened to the words, and something about it hit home. The song was called The Legend of Dogman. She heard the words and it clicked. That's what I saw when I was at my grandpa's cabin. The little girl in this story is my mom. This is a story that she's told to me a few times, and I remember it always used to send chills down my spine. I grew up in an area where there have been supposed dogman sightings. It's sort of an old legend, but not a very well-known one. My mom is a very honest person. She wouldn't make some shit up like that. She acknowledges that she was very young, and probably had a wild imagination, but she swears up and down that the story is true, and she still wonders to this day if what she saw was in fact Dogman. I was 16-17, and it was very common for my friends and I to go camping in the mountains, bring weed, beer, acid, whatever. I was always a big fraidy cat when it came to getting fucked up, so I usually abstained. Parents' warnings took to heart, I guess. This particular night most of my friends were tripping acid, while I was sipping a beer, enjoying the fire and whatnot, and a bunch of us girls decided to go off somewhere to pee. We were still pretty young and quite squeamish about the boys seeing us squat. Hell, I still am. We stumble off into the woods and end up walking for quite some time. One girl was searching for the perfect spot, and she was super high, but we all just went along. We finally come to a small clearing and decide to pee there. Everyone pees and we set off back to camp. One of my friends hears a low moan coming from the other side of the clearing, tells us to shh, but we don't hear it, so we urge her to come on. She is intent on investigating, so I decide to go with her. It was really dark out. You could only see as far as the lantern's light hit, so we were off into the unknown. Our light finally revealed a car. A brand new look-in Subaru. It was really sudden-like, and kinda freaked us out, so we scamper back to our friends screeching like lil 16-17 yo girls and set off back to our camp all freaked out. We tell the boys about it when we get there and they convince us we had happened upon another campsite and make fun of us for freaking out. 5 years later, I am in nursing school and working as an admin in a labor and delivery hospital. I have made a really good friend at work and she and I hang out all the time. One night she comes over and we are drinking and she tells me her dad has been missing since he was in high school. She says he had tried to commit suicide a few times and her family figured that he succeeded, but no one ever found him. She secretly was hoping he just ran off to start a new life and maybe she would see him again someday. Not very long after that, A man was found in a stolen Subaru up on the mount where we used to camp. He had been there for years, through every season, freezing to hot. There was a hose from the tailpipe to the window. The man had committed suicide. It made the news, and one of the guys from high school called and reminded me of that night in the woods. The car was found not far from our usual spot. Wasn't that nuts? That was what we saw. At work, my friend got a call from her mother. The guy in the car was her dad. We heard him moaning. We saw the car. If we weren't such dumb shit little kids, we could have done something. I watched my friend fall apart over it, but didn't tell her about my experience in the woods. I have always felt so bad. True story that happened to me. 5 years ago I responded to a call for a respiratory emergency. As we're pulling out of the station, we get an update from dispatch to expedite, and that the person has gone unresponsive. We arrived to this dilapidated, super creepy house. What was so unsettling about the house was the layout. It was a very strange family that lived in there. They were all very pale and dirty, and would keep going indoors and exiting out of other doors. It was all very, very unsettling. Anyway, after a bit of confusion, someone tells us that the patient is at the top of the stairs. We get to the top, and there she is, half underneath the bed, completely naked, looking almost like that girl in the closet at the beginning of The Ring. We begin CPR and I'm trying not to get sick. I'm a rookie, but, as I'm looking around, more and more things are completely wigging me out. Odd things written on the walls, the smell of cat shit and urine, there were cats everywhere, and the shit and blood on the mattress on the bed that our patient was under. It was a puzzling scene to say the least. Anyway, she didn't make it, so we had to gather the family up along with the police and paramedics and inform them that she wasn't going to make it. What makes it so strange was that her daughter was right around my age. I was 23, and she was obviously very strange, and on top of all of it, was almost completely naked. She really freaked me out, the way she was staring at the room that her mother was in. Fast forward to a few days later, I'm taking my then girlfriend out to dinner. First, I need to stop by work and get my paycheck before the bank closes. We're heading out and it's beginning to get dark. I realize that we are about to pass the house, and I say, remember that CPR call I told you about that was really creepy? We're about to pass the house. As we pass, I notice the mattress on the curb, with the stains of blood and shit on it. She notes that in and of itself is really fucking creepy, and probably illegal. I tell her that the family is literally the creepiest group of people that I've ever encountered. We stop in, I get the paycheck, and we're off to the bank. Now, here comes the part that will haunt me for the rest of my life. As we're approaching the house, I notice the daughter standing on the sidewalk, staring at the mattress. As we pass by, her head cocks up and she locks her eyes on me driving my car. She gives me the eeriest, scariest look. I swear it happened in slow motion. The only way I can describe it is that she looked hungry. I have no idea how she knew it was me. I was driving my personal vehicle with no distinguishing markings or anything. Also, there was a steady stream of traffic, so it's not like I was the only car on the road and would just break her concentration. I knew I wasn't imagining it, either, because it scared the fuck out of my then GF, also. Months later, the family moved. Late at night on a highway in northern Ontario, a woman driving her car is relieved to finally find a gas station that's still open, so she pulls in. The attendant comes out and walks up to the driver's side. He stands there, waiting until she rolls down her window. She slips it down just a crack. "How much?" he asks. She tells him to fill it up. The attendant walks towards the back of the car and stands there a minute. The woman waits, then looks into the side view mirror. The attendant is just standing there, facing her. She's feeling pretty nervous, wondering why he's not pumping gas. Then he walks back up to the window and taps on it. "You need to open the flap, ma'am." Feeling stupid, the woman reaches down and clicks the gas flap open. The attendant walks back and starts pumping the gas. A minute or so later he finishes, and clicks the nozzle back into place on the pump. Then he stands there for a moment. The woman keeps looking at him in the side view mirror, feeling quite ill at ease. She doesn't like this, being alone at a tiny gas station in the middle of nowhere with only this stranger. The attendant then walks back up to the window and taps on it. She reaches into her purse and takes out her credit card, rolls open the window just a crack again, and as she passes the card through looks up at the attendant. He's staring down at her with wide, frightful eyes. She looks away quickly, really creeped out, and she rolls the window back up as soon as the attendant grasps the card. But he doesn't go to the cash booth, he just stands there a moment. The woman can't bear to look at him again. Finally he says, with a voice muffled through the closed window, "Ma'am, there's a problem with your card. Could you please step inside the cash booth? What's wrong with the card? She asks loudly, with a definite strain in her voice. Something's wrong with the barcode. I'll need you to come over to the cash so we can make a call to the company. There's no way she is getting outside her car, on an empty, dark highway, late at night, with only that weirdo around. Besides, she realizes, as a sudden chill overcomes her, how could he know if there was a problem with the barcode if he hadn't even been to the cash desk to swipe it? The woman's breathing suddenly increases as she feels panic creep upon her. She summons up a note of restraint in her voice. Please, can you just call them yourself? Sorry, but I'll need to see some ID. Could you please just step over to the booth? It'll only take a minute. Realizing he won't let it be, she whispers a prayer and reaches into her purse to check for cash. Yes. She has a $50 bill. Clutching it in her hand, she unrolls the window just a crack yet again and passes it through. Never mind, I'll just pay cash. Ma'am, are you sure? He asks. What? She almost yells, as she accidentally looks up at him again. The same wide, fearful eyes staring down at her. She looks away. Yes. Cash. I can fix the card problem, you just need to come over to the phone with me, he says. She's really terrified now, and half screams at the man, listen asshole, it's cash. That's all you're getting from me. Alright, he responds, now you just wait right here and I'll go get your change. Don't move. I'll be right back. She can see him out of her peripheral vision, walking backwards towards the booth, always facing her. She can't bear to look his way. She can't imagine what he has in the booth. What if he brings it back with him? Fuck the change, she thinks, just as she realizes he also still has her credit card. She can't take this anymore, fuck the card, I'll cancel it. She starts up the car and as soon as it hums to life she tears away and off into the dark night. The attendant is in his booth on the phone, breathing heavily. An official sounding voice on the other end asks, did you tell her? No, the attendant responds, I couldn't. Why not? He had a knife and a finger to his lips. I tried to get her out of there, but the whole time he was watching me from the floor behind her seat. I'm a funeral director, and one day we had a man come in who lost his teenage daughter. She was a daddy's girl through and through, so he was pretty torn up about her passing. He bought her the beat that money could buy, nice casket, a good vault, etc. But after she was interred he kept having these nightmares that his daughter was drowning. In a bathtub, in the ocean, when a car she was in careened off of a bridge. They were a bit different every time, but the message was always the same. In every dream he could hear her screaming, Daddy help me, I'm drowning. Now keep in mind, drowning had nothing to do with her cause of death. At first he thought he was just grieving, but the nightmares wouldn't let up. He came back to us and after explaining the situation, we got a permit to disinter her and move her to another cemetery. When the diggers removed the lid off of her vault, which, by the way, is supposed to keep water out, it was filled to the brim with water. After she was moved he stopped having nightmares. I've been sitting here for hours trying to find a fitting start to what is ultimately no point in writing. The only one I'll ever tell is the psychiatrist I have an appointment with next week, and you. I have memories of a life I haven't lived, or am living. It's not a past life, or being another person. It's me, Simon, with my same family, same dad and mom, and all my brothers. But yet everything is different. Growing up I thought they were dreams that I just remembered very well. When the subject about dreams came up, and how it's hard to remember them all, I used to tell that I remember almost everything I dreamed about. My perception about what I remembered being dreams changed in my late teens and I never talked about them again, to anyone. I used to row, and it was in my local rowing club I met Claire. She was lovely in every way and I ended up having a crush for her. She however liked my best friend as well. Before I was made aware of this we dated for a few weeks, but when a friend of hers told me about it, I confronted her and she told me it was true. I was heartbroken and we decided to break it off. She started dating my friend and I moved on. Shortly after I met Elizabeth, who is now my current wife. But before me and Elizabeth got serious, Claire and my friend had broken up and she reached out to me and asked me for a second chance. I told her no. But, I also remember saying yes. I remember our dates. I remember the day I asked her to be my girlfriend and make it official. I remember borrowing the clubhouse connected to our rowing club and covering it with candles, and her walking in. I remember telling her that I love her and that I wanted her to be my girl. I was 18 and she was 17. These memories or dreams ran parallel as I was dating Elizabeth and I used to feel horribly guilty about dreaming about Claire. I changed rowing club and started avoiding places I knew I'd meet Claire, but nothing helped. I was in love with Elizabeth and Claire and experienced dating both of them. I thought I was going crazy. This is the point where my perception started to change. Elizabeth and I were an official couple and we had been going steady for over a year. We were happy. I was coping with my feeling and dreams/memories with Claire. I was probably crazy/creepy and repressed it all and hadn't seen her in months. In all honesty, should barely know her at this point, but yet I knew everything about her. Her childhood stories, her house, siblings, parents, their cabin 2 hours from town where I lost my virginity to her, and yet didn't. The cabin with its stupid toilet door which never locks properly, and caused her mother walking in when I was wanking. I still feel embarrassed by this. Yet the memory is off, it hasn't happened. Everything changed December 2001, I hadn't been sleeping properly for a long time, but December was the worst. I thought I dreamt the memories, and it had made me fearful of sleep. I had been working overtime every day of the week for 2 weeks. I was Thursday and after 4 hours of overtime, I was beat. I drove home. Got the keys from the garage, where we hid it under the paint box. Went inside, and straight to bed. I woke up with Claire's dad standing over me. He had found me in Claire's bed after the coming home and discovering the keys were missing and the door unlocked. Horror, disbelief, confusion. This is Claire's dad. I know him, and I have never met him. I just rambled, I can't remember saying anything coherent. I eventually told him I went into the wrong house. He asked me how I found the keys. What could I tell him? I had no reasonable explanation. I had never been to Claire's house, yet I knew where they hid the keys in every damn room in the house. I basically lived there. I told him I didn't know. He didn't ask me any questions after that, just that the police were on their way and to sit tight. I kept quiet until they arrived. When the police came, he told them I was probably drunk. I guess he thought so because of my rambling and confused state. The police took me to the station for a statement. I lied and told them I had been drinking. I knew the blood results would be negative, but I didn't care. I just wanted to go home. After a few hours they let me go and I went home. I didn't tell anyone about this. A few weeks later I received a letter stating that the blood results were negative and that they wanted me to go back to the station for a new interview. But before the date arrived I received another letter saying that they would be dropping the charges. Claire's dad was not pressing. After this episode I went to the doctors for sleeping pills. I never let myself get that tiered again. I never drank alcohol after that day either, or do anything that could cause me to lose focus as to where or who I am. The different memories follow me throughout each day. And every day there are new memories, glimpses. Most of the different memories are so different, or feel so different, that I can distinguish between them than my own. But sometimes I meet fiends that don't know me or know my way around places I shouldn't really know. These memories are much harder to distinguish, almost impossible. I'll stop here. I have written so much now, and now that I'm at the point of why I'm writing this, I see no point in writing it. It's soon 1 a.m. here. I'm afraid my wife or kids will wake up and ask me why I'm crying. I thought I could cope with the memories. I coped with Claire being diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, the cancer spreading to her liver. I coped with Claire dying, being at her funeral and carrying her casket, being told she was dead and not being at her funeral, not visiting her grave yet remember visiting her grave. I have 2 daughters with Elizabeth, Anna and Jane. And I have Elise. I had Elise with Claire. Elise has my eyes. I remember her being born shortly after my first daughter and it changed everything. With my daughters came the sensation of what real, unconditional and bottomless love was. I can't cope with it anymore. I have lost a daughter. All I have are memories. I will never ever experience the first-hand sensation of hugging, kissing, just holding her. And every day I have new memories of her, making me love her and miss her more and more. I skip work just to sit outside the apartment we live in. I know the apartment inside and out, where she learned to walk, where she learned to go to the potty all alone and how we went straight to Mama's grave to tell her about it. I know it will ruin my life and there's nothing I can do. I'm in complete and utter conflict. I hope it's a mental condition, but at the same time I'm afraid of taking pills that will cause me to lose Elise completely. There is no help and it will ruin me. About 15 years ago I was 17 and in high school in Seattle. I hung out a lot with people who smoke or drank but didn't really join in too often. My parents were okay with it but basically made me realize I didn't need it. That didn't mean I didn't participate occasionally. One night, I was with a few friends from our soccer team. They wanted to smoke before we all had to go home since it was a school night. We went to Volunteer Park on Capitol Hill. There are a lot of trees on the west side of the road there where you can go do things people don't want to be seen doing. Everything was normal, giggling, excited kids smoking some weed. No big deal. I took a hit off the blunt, but because my parents were picking me up, I decided to go cop watch. I just wanted to hit it once, go home and play some video games, but still be cool. No big deal. I told them I was going to go out and make sure no cops came. They might have paid attention or they might have not. Normal shit, no big deal. At the park there are these evergreen trees that have these really low hanging branches that make it really easy to get 20 plus feet up in them. Imagine a really fat, reasonable sized Christmas tree, but without all the branches blocking the view. I climbed up one of those and relaxed and looked at the Space Needle. What a great night. Then I heard some branches snapping below me and I saw a guy standing there. He was staring where my friends were. I looked past him about 25 feet and there was another guy standing there, and a few more. I looked to my other side and there were more guys standing there, about 15 total in a semicircle around where I thought my friends were. This was about 11 p.m., no reason for a group of them there. I didn't move, this wasn't some community cop shit, or even cops. I waited for what seemed like forever, slowly climbed down, and dropped and sprinted as fast as I could towards the greenhouse. About 50 feet away I saw my friends running out of the woods back where I thought they were. They said someone tried to grab one of them on the way out. The girl screamed as the guy grabbed my friend, and they all ran. No reason. So sketchy. I've heard about people disappearing from Seattle parks before, fuck that shit. Be careful, high schoolers in Seattle just trying to have some fun. The neighborhood that I grew up in was on the outskirts of Oklahoma City. My grandparents had built the house that we lived in, and it was the kind of place that we knew all of our neighbors. We were never afraid to ride our bikes everywhere and everyone looked out for one another. About 3 doors down from where I lived, there was a house that we always called the murder house. Before I was born, the man that lived there was brutally murdered and his girlfriend was horrifically raped. The murder weapon was recovered in the backyard of our across the street neighbors, and it was a machete from a neighborhood greenhouse. The murder was always thought to be because of a drug deal gone bad. The case remained cold for a long time and the house sat abandoned for as long as I could remember. When I was growing up in my house, my bedroom windows faced our street. Sleeping in the room from the ages of 4 to 11, I would always wake up in the middle of the night after having really spooky dreams. I always had the feeling that I was being watched, and being that young, I never understood exactly why I felt that way. Quietly one day my parents installed blackout shutters in my room and I never asked why. We moved away from that house when I was 11, and shortly after we moved, someone bought the murder house, fixed it up, and the events that happened there were just a distant memory. Flash forward to 2 years ago. Now 26, I was sitting in bed one night watching Cold Case Files on A&E. I picked up the episode in the middle of the story, but something about it seemed really familiar. Suddenly the water tower of my hometown flashed on the screen and an image of that infamous house came up as Bill Curtis started to describe the crime that had taken place there. Come to find out, the murder had been solved. The murderer wasn't a drug fiend as originally was suggested. He was a peeping Tom that had been terrorizing my neighborhood for nearly 20 years. He had peeked into the windows of that house on the evening of the murder, seen the man's girlfriend, and set about attacking her. Her boyfriend, hearing the commotion, came to her defense and was slaughtered in that house. The peeping Tom escaped and continued to look in the windows of the other houses for years. The memories of waking up in the middle of the night and the feeling of being watched had been very real, but nobody could catch him. The blackout shutters on my bedroom windows were placed so that he could not look into my room at night. The man was finally caught because of a peeping Tom complaint filed by a woman about 3 blocks away from my old home. The man was notorious for not wearing shoes, and it was the imprint of his bare foot in her garden that was matched to a bare footprint at the crime scene. I still get the creeps thinking about that. This is the story of how I came to believe in ghosts. When I was 12, my mom dragged me and my friend along with her to a haircut. We were bored, and decided to take a walk down the main street we were on and window shop. Just a few stores down there was a gap for a small parking lot. As we walk past, an elderly African American lady waves us over to the car she's sitting in, with the door open. Being that there are the 2 of us, and that she's clearly more feeble, we go inquire what's wrong. The lady seems a little out of it, and is begging us to go across the street to another salon that her daughter owns. She's having trouble getting out of the car, and wants her daughter's help. She just keeps repeating, even as we're walking away to begin the task, multiple renditions of "please just get my daughter and I'm stuck in the car." We walk over and inquire to the salon, 2 small very pale girls wandering into a primarily African American hair studio, and are greeted with odd looks and silence. We get shown to the manager. She listens to our story, and goes from inquisitive to white as a sheet in all off 10 seconds. We look to one another as something is obviously wrong. She starts in on us, asking all these questions, starting to grow upset. When we inquire what we did wrong, and why we're not going to help her mom, she tells us this. With a nauseous look, and tears starting down her face, she says her mother just a few months before had died horribly when she got forced off a bridge and drowned when she couldn't get herself out of her car. We immediately run back across the street. No car. No lady. Ask the lot attendant. No older lady fitting that description had come through all shift. I never could question again. We thought it was a prank, but the daughter's reaction was too real and candid to be anything but the truth. I work as a nurse. While I was training to become a nurse, a group of my friends and I were having a discussion as to whether there is some sort of an afterlife. I stated that I didn't think so, and a few of my friends disagreed. My instructor looked at me and said, "Well, I used to be like you, but I have seen some strange things in the hospital that made me change my mind." She proceeded to tell us a story about a friend of hers, who was a nurse, whose daughter had terminal cancer. The daughter was in her late 20s, early 30s. She had a husband and 2 small children. This was a devastating situation, and she was about to pass any day. She knew this and kept telling her friends and family how afraid she was of dying. Even though she would be surrounded by her family in her last hours, she knew that she would die alone. Her parents were taking turns spending the night with her in the hospital room along with her husband. It was her father's turn to go home for the evening and take care of the grandkids. She ended up dying that night and her last words were, "I'm not afraid anymore. Dad is here with me." As nurses and other health professionals can attest, people have some strange last words that may or may not mean anything. After the body had been processed and taken to the morgue, the mother went home and found her husband dead on the couch. She anticipated having 1 funeral, and she now had to plan for 2. It was really creepy. Also, there is a ghost in my hospital of a 10-year-old little girl who was the first child to die in my hospital. Many patients report seeing her in a white hospital gown. Several patients have been noted to yell, "Get that little girl out of here." This is a true story. I witnessed it firsthand and I am probably the most logic-driven / need solid proof skeptical type of guy you'll meet. My mother always claimed that her dreams had meanings. She is about 62 and grew up in Syria, which had more than its share of myths and nonsense like that, and being the skeptic I am, never took her claim seriously and always replied with for every dream that somewhat comes true, there are probably hundreds that don't, which human nature makes us conveniently forget. Anyway, when I was about 15, some 10 years ago, one morning just before midday my mother came into the kitchen and was visibly shaken. She started to cry and we asked her what was wrong. She said she had a bad dream about her elderly mother, who lived in Syria, and we live in Australia. She had never actually cried about a dream before, and while she claimed her dreams had meanings, she kind of went about it lightheartedly and it didn't really affect her emotionally at all. So we kind of laughed it off and said, "Oh, is that all?" We thought something actually happened. What was the dream? She said she dreamed that her mother was holding her head with her hands, like she was hurt. That's all the dream was, simply my grandmother holding her head in her hands, as if in some kind of pain. So anyway, we decided to call up overseas a bit later that afternoon and see if everything was okay, as my mother continued to feel upset and worried. We knew that grandma would be fine, we just wanted our mother to hear her voice so she would stop being sad and worried. So we call, and my uncle who lives with my grandma answers and as expected, it turns out grandpa is fine. But he said that morning she had kind of tripped and bumped her face and eye on a cupboard, and she was a bit bruised but otherwise she was absolutely fine. As you can imagine, we were quite surprised by this, as my mom's dream kind of had some meaning after all, and it was pretty damn accurate. So mom speaks to grandma about all sorts of things, sees how she is, gossips etc. and says she loves her and all that and gets off the phone. So afterwards, my mom is still sad and continues to be worried, as if something is very wrong. We thought she would be fine after speaking to her mom and seeing that she is fine, but for some reason my mom starts crying again, this time even worse. We reassure her and tell her it's fine, we all just spoke to grandma and saw that she's fine, so stop worrying etc. She is silent the whole time and just weeping. Few hours go by, mom kind of stays in her room weeping alone. Later that evening, the phone rings, my dad answers. It's my uncle. My grandpa had just passed away from a stroke, literally a few minutes ago. We go in all together to my mother's room, she looks at us, still weeping, and simply shakes her head and says she already knows. We all hug her. I would never have believed it if I wasn't there the entire time. Read this in NH magazine, long but worth the read. Still gives me the chills. An AMC crew member named George was sent up in the spring with a two-way radio to assess the winter damage and report back to the crew below any special equipment that might be needed for opening the Lakes of the Clouds hut on Mount Washington. As in every winter, with the north winds blowing so fiercely, the windows of the hut are boarded up tight and secure. This was just how George found them that day. By the afternoon, the men at the base signaled up to the lone hiker to see that he had made a safe arrival. Strangely, he did not answer. This didn't worry the other members of the crew at first. Maybe he had gone out for a little hike around to check on some other things. By 8 o'clock that evening, the crew tried again and still there was no radio response from George. Anxiety rose, and the members at the base drew out a plan for an early morning exodus to the hut to check on their friend's safety. The next morning they made their way, slow and steady, up the snow-packed trail to the hut. From all indications, George had arrived safely at the hut. His backpack and gear lay open on the dining room floor. There on a table was his two-way radio, still powered. They called out for him but couldn't find him anywhere. The searchers began looking outside for footprints. They looked in the bunkrooms with their flashlights and headlamps. The hut was eerily dark with the windows still boarded up from the harsh winter. Someone heard a noise, a whimper, coming from below the kitchen sink. At last George was found, shaking horribly and crouched under the sink with the cabinet doors closed. In his white fists he clutched an axe and pleaded with his crewmates, "Just please, get me the hell out of here. Just get me out of here." Stunned by this discovery, the crew members quickly pulled him out of the cupboard. He was soaked in sweat and trembling in fear. The members begged George to tell them what was wrong, yet he would not answer them. He simply repeated, "Just get me the hell out of here. Please." Quietly they surrounded their friend in a secure clutch and helped him outside the hut and back onto the trail down the mountain. One crew member radioed back to the Pinkham Notch base for assistance, and an ambulance was waiting for them as soon as they reached the bottom. What terror had taken form at the hut to reduce the bravest of men into this state of unprecedented fear? No one could say. They guessed that he had run into a wild animal, maybe a wolf or bear, and had become fearful for his life. As the weeks passed and George lay recovering in the hospital, he finally opened up to a close confidant and relayed this story. After his long trek up the trail, he was overcome with exhaustion and hunger. He unlocked the heavy padlocks on the hut doors and quickly went inside into the large dining hall. There he sat on the bench by one of the tables and began to take account of his food supplies as he rested. He thought he'd wait just a short while and catch his breath before radioing back to the base. Suddenly he felt as if there were someone else in the dining room with him. He felt a form approach him from behind, as if someone was about to put their hands on his shoulders. He jumped up and quickly turned around to face the back of the dining hall. There, peering in at him from the dining room window, was a face, a distorted, grotesque face pressed to the glass to the dining room window panes, which were entirely boarded up from the outside. George backed up in horror as he looked at each window pane covered by the thick boards, and there he saw, one after the other, the same face, in every window, glaring back at him. The face seemed to melt through the glass and into the room where he was standing. That was the last thing George remembered. He would never return to the hut or the AMC crew again, and has since lost all memory of the trauma of the summit that changed his life forever.